So the next topic that we're going to go on to is about bloating and acid reflux. So we were actually a bit surprised. We saw a few questions pop up about this during the event, and it wasn't something that we were necessarily prepared to cover. So it was interesting that this topic came up. So moving on to the first question, which is sort of about acid reflux. So apart from sort of tablets and medication, is there anything that can help with acid reflux and indigestion that people can make a change in their diet, perhaps?
Yes. So I would actually say that before medication, we should be considering what is causing the acid reflux, right? And so for most people, the acid reflux is probably something that has, built in over time, but there are certain triggers to this reflux. And these triggers tend to be, they could be food, so specific foods. The biggest culprits tend to be very fatty foods, so high fat foods, and as well as spicy foods. So any kind of, usually if you're having burgers, or if you're having, burgers and French fries, which are usually in a lot of oils, or even if you're having, we were just talking about a lot of coconut oil in excess, or a lot of peanut butter in excess, these can cause reflux because they actually sit in your stomach for a very long time, and they don't kind of transit through as quickly, as opposed to, let's say, high fiber foods who tend to transit more quickly through the body. The other things that can cause reflux in terms of foods are things like citrusy foods. So often tomatoes, maybe some oranges, maybe some lemons. Also things like coffee and alcohol really trigger reflux because they actually open up kind of what's supposed to be the sphincter between the stomach and the esophagus. And so as that kind of relaxes and opens up, food tends to kind of come back up. So these are mostly the food triggers. And again, you may have all these triggers, you may have none of these triggers, you may have just one here and there. So this is really about, again, listening to yourself, finding what works, what is yours. And then the other thing that we have to take into account is lifestyle factors, right? So it's not just about the foods you're eating, but are you having that dinner really late at night, right before you lie down and go to sleep? Because chances are that if you're having a heavy meal before you lie down, well, you're going to be lying down, and then all of a sudden the food from your stomach can kind of creep back into your esophagus, and it can cause that reflux. It can trigger it again. So general things like try and have a lighter meal at night, several hours before going to sleep. Don't lie down straight after your meal. And certain lifestyle changes around that, simple things, can really help with reflux in the long run.
Those are excellent tips. Thank you ever so much. I hadn't really considered about lying down after a meal, so that's really a good thing to think of. So the other questions that we had on this topic were all associated with bloating. So a number of people expressed that their tummy feels bloated, and they were wondering whether it's their lupus, whether it's their medication, whether it's certain foods. And so they were asking, are there any foods that they should be avoiding or staying away from to try to reduce this bloated feeling that they experience?
So bloating is a very non-specific symptom, right? And bloating could come from quite a few things. One of the things that we try and look at and maybe eliminate, because it could be a very easy way to get rid of bloating, is your bloating actually a sign of a food intolerance? So let's remember that a food intolerance is not necessarily a food allergy, right? An allergy is like an immediate response to the food and the secretion of histamine, which can cause things like itching, can cause the swelling of your throat, the watering of your eyes, versus a food intolerance can actually take up to 3 days to show its symptoms. And it tends to be a lot of these very non-specific symptoms, which you may just think is, oh, I don't feel so good. I'm a bit brain foggy. I'm a bit tired. I'm a bit, my tummy hurts a bit. I feel so bloated. And these could be signs of an intolerance. So some common foods that people tend to be intolerant to and have symptoms of bloating include, the big two are going to be dairy and gluten. right? So these are probably the most common ones. Other common ones, actually, soy can be a big source of intolerance for some people. And then generally, although I do recommend, as we talked about before, a lot of legumes, so things like lentils, beans, chickpeas, these are very healthy. They can cause a lot of bloating and discomfort, particularly in people who are not used to eating them. So when incorporating these kind of in the diet, it's probably beneficial to start small, to have them in very small amounts, and to kind of build tolerance over time. So if any of these foods kind of sound familiar, you feel like you have, you know, a lot of wheat in your diet, a lot of dairy in your diet, a lot of legumes in your diet, and these are causing bloating, or if you are having a lot of, let's say, processed foods in your diet, these have a lot of hidden ingredients, right, that can really mess again and cause intolerances. So looking at that and maybe trying to be more aware of after what foods do you feel bloated or not. The gold standard in functional medicine to identify intolerances and causes, triggers of bloating is actually to do an elimination diet. And this would mean that you actually, usually you're accompanied by kind of a certified professional to guide you through the process, but you go through a period of, let's say, between 3 weeks at the shortest and 3 months at the longest of eliminating. So let's say a series of allergens or intolerances, which is the gluten, the dairy, the refined sugar, sometimes alcohol as well. And over 3 weeks, and then after the 3 weeks of that total elimination, bringing them back in one by one and waiting 3 days. And by doing this, we can really find out, is there one particular thing that is irritating to you? Generally, I find that when people kind of shift their diets to the whole, more plant-based vegetable foods, their bloating gets better.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much.